Okay, so first of all, just a few housekeeping things. For those of you who don't know me, I am Eva Bruce. I'm a senior at Flathead, and I am the founder and chair of the Kalispell Montana Youth Action chapter. So Montana Youth Action is a youth-run, nonpartisan nonprofit that is focused on youth advocacy and engagement in politics. So that's why we put together this forum, so we could have the questions that youth want to ask answered by our local candidates. First of all, just to make this run smoothly, if you're not speaking, please keep your mic muted so we can hear everyone. Candidates, we're going to answer questions in the same order every time. So it's going to go Debo Powers, Jeremy DeRuel, Ross Frazier, Jennifer Allen, Derek Skis, and then Kyle Waterman. And we're just going to use that order every time so there's no confusion. If viewers have any questions during segments, you can either put questions in the chat, or when we have a brief Q&A session after each segment, you can use the little raise hand, either like on video or through the Zoom function. And we'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. That's all I have. So why don't we get started with candidates, a brief introduction of who you are, what you're running for, and why you're running. So we will start with you, Debo Powers.
Thank you so much for having us, for having this forum. My name is Debo Powers in House District 3, and I represent Columbia Falls, the Canyon communities, and the North Fork. I live north of Polebridge in a solar-powered cabin off the electric grid. I was appointed to this position a year ago when Zach Perry resigned, and I'm running to hold on to this seat in the legislature. That's why I'm running, to hold on to this seat. I care deeply about Montana, and I'm really happy today to be part of this forum. Thank you.
I'm Jeremy DeRuel. I'm running for House District 6, which is essentially everything from west of Whitefish Stage Road, south of Whitefish, includes about 4 mile, 3 mile north, and then that whole swath up towards Olney and Lincoln County there. Huge geographic area with a diverse population within that geographic area. The reason I'm running is because I've always had a passion and wanting to make people's lives easier. And I believe policy on a statewide level enables that to happen, and it trickles down all the way to the local government level. So that's primarily the reason why I'm running. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ross Frazier. I'm running for Montana House District 7. A little bit about myself. I was born on April Fool's Day under a full moon at the Kalispell Regional Hospital. So I got that going. I've lived in 3 different states, in 2 different continents. And I studied environmental economics, which is about the relationship between a healthy environment and a thriving economy. After that, I interned with Montana Senator Max Baucus. I got to talk with constituents all across Montana about things like water rights, livestock and wildlife management. In 2014, after that, I had a chance to travel to Beijing and work as an English as a second language tutor. I worked there as a teacher for almost 5 years. In 2015, I experienced the worst recorded air pollution on the planet. And now that I'm back here in my hometown of Montana, I want to fight to be your voice in the Montana legislature to fight for a just, equitable, and livable future for all Montanans.
So hi, I'm Jennifer Allen. I'm the Democratic candidate in House District 10, which is in the Big Fork, Woods Bay, Ferndale, and Swan Lake area. And I grew up in a Quaker family in Philadelphia. moved out to the West in 10th grade to Colorado, graduated with a BA in psychology from the University of Colorado, and then later a master's in social work from Eastern Washington University. So most of my work has been working with really the poorest and most vulnerable of our community members. And most of my work has been in crisis intervention in mental health. And so I chose to run for office primarily because I have these decades of practical experience. And most of that practical experience has been in trying to run social safety net programs for persons in a way that's both efficient and effective, and economically always helps as well. So that's really my goal in running for office, is to be able to support the democratic functions within Montana.
All right, Derek, I believe you are up next.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I thought Kyle was before me. I'll have to change my order. Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Ava and Scout, for putting this on. Ava, that's pretty impressive that you're in high school and you started out the Montana Youth Action 501c3. I had a question with Scout if it was a 4 or a 3. Excited that you guys are a 3. Afterwards, I'd love to discuss with you where you're getting your funding. I know you had a state grant, and I'd love to talk to you about your membership. And I'm just excited as all get out that there's young folks interested in politics, because I often tell the younger people that if you're not interested in politics, it surely is interested in you, and it's mapping out your future if you're not careful. So hats off to you both and all the other members of your group. My name is Derek Skis. I'm the current representative for House District 11. It's been my honor to serve as the representative for that seat for 2 cycles. Before that, I was up at Dave Fern's seat. This was before the district got changed, in House District 4 in Whitefish back in 2011. So by the grace of God, I've won this seat already. I don't have a Democrat opponent in my general. So I'm going back, and this will be my 4th term. And of course, by Montanans' wisdom, I am termed out after this one. So I'm kind of excited to get back into the private sector. My whole term pretty much has been involved with energy. I've been on we call it FRET, Federal Regulations, Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And I've either been the vice chair or the chair of that committee, either in the interims or in the last cycles. And so that's my passion, is energy in Montana. Thank you for having us.
And my name is Kyle Waterman. I am running for Senate District number 2, which is the Evergreen area, just outside of the Evergreen area, going up to Columbia Falls, all the way up to Polbridge and all the way to Essex. So that's really is sort of like part of it is Debo's House District is in this, and it is really a lot of the gateways into Glacier National Park. One of the things I'm running for is that I do think that Glacier National Park just needs a better representative when it comes down to the legislature of what it's like to actually live with an economic engine. We have so many tourists and everybody who's coming there, and we're seeing some issues that are about growth and about how do we manage getting in and out of the parks? How do we get workforce in and out of the parks? So I am locally involved in our public transportation, what's called Eagle Transit, in Kalispell, and I really think that we should start to look at the changes of that and how we could work and integrate better with the park. But also the other thing is that the park provides a lot of sometimes seasonal or just tourist sort of jobs, and we need to make sure that we have a healthy, what I believe a healthy manufacturing sector. I work at a small light manufacturer, and I think it's important for us to make sure that we have jobs that are surrounded about the park and access to doing that, but we need to also make sure that we have a robust job sector. And my small business is an online retail business. One, I think we need more of those type of businesses, and that requires good broadband internet services. So we need to be able to have that sort of infrastructure improvement. So those are some of the reasons I'm running. I would agree with Representative Skis. Thank you so much for the invitation to join. It's great to see your leadership and being able to do that. And I would just note that one of the things that you're contributing is a forum, and we haven't seen enough of these type of forums. And I actually believe that that's one of those important things about having youth involved is you're being creative and doing something which not every chamber or other groups have done. And I think that that's why we need youth to be involved in our politics. So again, thank you for the invite.
Okay, I think something happened with Debo. So I think we'll wait a bit longer to see if she comes back in, and then if not, we will just skip ahead to the next person and she can give her answer whenever she's able to get back on.
Speaking of broadband access, sometimes when she is up in the North Fork, it gets very intriguing.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, I think we are just going to wait for her to be able to get back on, and in the meantime, we will go ahead with the questions. So our first segment is going to be on the environment. The first question is, what steps will you take if elected to address climate change? So Jeremy, why don't you go ahead with that?
All right, thank you for the question, Eva. So in my opinion, I think we do need to kind of wean ourselves off the reliance of fossil fuels. And I think going towards a more cleaner energy is definitely a must. Technology is definitely increasing in that capacity, and it's making the cost drive down a little bit cheaper for smaller installation businesses, and creating some tax incentives for those local businesses to take hold and encourage entrepreneurship in that realm of things. So in that regard, for the first part of the question, yeah, I believe that we in Montana has numerous amounts of resources we could utilize to make that happen. And even if it starts on a small scale and grows, that's the whole idea and a projection of that to make it happen. So as far as the that part of the question, and Eva, did you ask about the other part as far as logging and coal? If that
that's going to be the next question.
Okay, all right, thank you. Wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Thank you. There's Debo.
Yeah, there she is. All right, so we will have her give her answer next. All right, Debo. So we're in the environment segment right now, and the question is, what steps will you take if elected to address climate change?
What did I miss? Did anybody else speak before me?
Yes, Jeremy gave his answer, and that was as far as we got, so you didn't miss too much of it.
Okay. Yes, I'm so sorry I got dumped out. I guess that's because I'm on satellite internet out here in the boondocks. Okay, so, well, I think climate change is one of the most important issues that's facing humanity. I think it's a big threat to all of us, to our economy, to our lives, I think we need to take bold steps on climate change. I think the first thing we need to do is be thinking about how to transition our economy from one based on fossil fuels to one based on renewable energy. And this will not happen overnight, but we need to start making the steps toward doing that. And we need to make sure that workers who are working in the fossil fuel industry are part of that transition into good paying jobs in renewable energy. I think that's an important part of it. There's a lot of things we can do as a state, because there are a lot of states around the country are doing some very good things. One is we should set goals for decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. And we could set up building standards for conservation, energy conservation on buildings. There's a lot of things that we can do, and we need to start making those steps now. I also think we should walk the talk. Our private lives should be about this transition. That's why I live in a solar powered cabin. But it takes more than personal actions. It takes public policy. Thank you.
Hi again, and thank you again for the excellent question. Before I specifically address the question of the actions that to take, I think we need to address two basic facts here. The first is that we need to recognize human activity is the cause of climate change. This is an indisputable fact. It has mountains of evidence from numerous studies going back decades from around the globe and from many different sources. We cannot be continually arguing about whether or not climate change is happening. Since the Industrial Revolution, our emissions from man-made activities have warmed the planet. The second thing we need to recognize is that climate change poses a serious threat to all of humanity, including us here in Montana. It poses a threat due to rising sea levels, which are going to push massive populations out of their cities on the coasts. Where are they going to go? A lot of them are going to look at our state. It causes damage because of the wildfire activities, because of the severe weathers, the horrible droughts that our farmers have to deal with. These are serious things that are facing us right now today. And worst of all, it increases the spread and the severity of deadly diseases and viruses, such as the pandemic that we are currently facing in our state right now. Now, with that out of the way, I'll answer the question, what would I do when I get into office? I'm going to push for net zero greenhouse gas emissions in our state. I think that the governor's plan right now, which has a date of 2035, is a good start. He doesn't want to hit net zero. He wants net zero just from the energy distribution thing. I think we need to make that statewide, the entire economy net zero by 2035. We need to transition our economy out of the extractive industries of mining for oil and for coal, and transition it into sustainable industries like wind and solar infrastructure manufacturing. And the most vital part of the answer to this is whatever action we take with regards to the climate, we need to make sure that we do it in an equitable fashion. So no more handing out free monopolies to Northwestern Energy and the other privately owned state utility companies so that they can profit off of the backs of the workers like they've been doing so far. We need to make this a community-based solution where local communities have ownership of the technology and the energy production equipment. We need to decentralize our energy grid so that all Montanans can reap the rewards of the new technology.
Okay, I'm going to have to fuss about following Ross, who steals all my best lines. Gotta love a fellow progressive. So, you know, I mentioned that my career has been in what is called crisis intervention, which means that there are human beings out in our community who go into crisis and then they get stuck and they need somebody to go help get things unstuck. And one of the key things in crisis intervention theory is that when we face a crisis, our first instinct is to do the same thing we have always done, only do it twice as hard. And so I think Ross is absolutely right on point here that our biggest issue is to accept that we are in a climate change crisis and that we're going to have to do things differently than we have now in order to fix it. And then if we don't do that, we face incredible impacts on our farmers, on our forests, on our workers, on our homes, on our transportation, drought, extreme weather events. I mean, we're seeing the evidence all around. So the science is in. And we simply have got to be innovative and responsive to this science. And so I really see part of my job as a legislature is to be sure that we keep pushing this crisis. We cannot let it go into the closet. It just can't happen. I do agree. I think the Montana Climate Solutions proposal that came out this year is a great start. I particularly love it because of the process. It was really not even Bullock's plan. It's a plan of over 40 stakeholders from the whole range of key decision makers. The committee did not come unanimously for everything, but 40 out of the 50 steps that are lined out as immediate steps we can take do have unanimous support. And so there's tons of things that we can get started on and get started on quickly. And that is simply what we need to do. The environmentalists say this plan, and you know, that's a word right there, environmentalists, let's put quotes around it. The environmentalists say that this is a solid plan. It's not perfect, but it's a good solid start. It is not necessarily supported by the chambers of commerce, by some of the other energy producers in our state. And those are steps that we need to continue to work on to get concurrence on what it is we need to do as a state. But when you're looking at young voters, I think this is the absolute key issue for the future of the next generation.
Excellent. Thank you, Eva, for the question. I'm going to shock everybody on the panel and tell everyone that I disagree entirely with the global warming situation. It's funny, back in the 70s and the 80s, it was global cooling, and then they couldn't prove that scientifically. So then in the 90s and the 2000s, it was global warming, then they couldn't prove that scientifically. So now they changed it to the word climate change. So no matter if it goes up or down, then it's caused by mankind. You look at the email scandal that came out of East Anglia and all the details. There was over 1,000 emails, and I've read a majority of those. And that right there should show you that there's a lot more to this that has to do with politics than it does anything else. Isn't it amazing that the solution to climate change is socialism? Take money from the wealthy folks and give it to the poorer countries. Not a single dime or penny goes toward actually mitigating the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. If you look at it, the only place it really exists is in models. You look at Al Gore's movie, The Inconvenient Truth, which was the oldest really point where this all began. Every single prediction he made in that show, that date has already come and gone and is proven false. We've got some Australian scientists that prove that there is no rising seashores, that data is false. There's just so much evidence that shows that this man-made climate change scenario is more to do with a Ponzi scheme than actual real science. I know you guys love to say there's a consensus of scientists, but if you understand what scientific method is skepticism. Every time something comes out in science, your immediate response should be, okay, wait a minute, let's put this through the rigors of science and make sure it really sticks out. Now we have 90% of scientists in the world agree to that. Well, then when you start doing the research on East Anglia, you find out 90% of scientists paid by governments agree to this. Independent scientists don't. The founder of the Weather Channel says it's a scam. There's just too much evidence to show. That having been said, a perfectly clean climate is incredibly important, and we need to do that through the way that we bond mines and we bond things that go out and do things to the environment, like logging projects and coal projects. We need to make sure that we have a zero influence on the environment from those things. But I disagree entirely with I mean, these fires are caused by poor management, beetle kill, and then, like you've seen in Oregon, over 90% of the fires are started by radicals. And so, it doesn't exist.
Well, I get the challenge of needing to show respect. I respectfully disagree with Representative Skis. I do believe in climate change. I do believe it is an issue. But I do think that, part of it is that we also need to be able to talk about what that looks like in Montana. And Representative Skis did mention something, which I believe is something that's going to be true about climate change and how it works for Montana. Fire management is going to be something that we are self-reliant on, and we need to be able to come up with our solutions of how we're going to be able to address our fire seasons, be able to have a management plan and a contingency enough to be able to fund that. I think that we will continue to see with climate change that other states mismanagement or however they're working with it, but they're going to pull a lot of the federal resources for fire management. And I believe that in Montana, we have to be able to find a direction of how we're managing our public lands and making a fire season plan that works really well for us. I also do believe that we're seeing with the other side of climate change, or just the fear of climate changes, which is in migration. So we are seeing a density explosion. I think it's got accelerated this last year, but I've been watching it for the last 10 years that we've been seeing. Flathead's been the second fastest growing county in Montana for a while now, and we're starting to see that. And to me, that also means that in Montana, we just have to be able to deal with what does it mean when we have an influx of population coming in. And that I personally, again, believes that, we have to start to talk about how we can build in density, how we can environmentally responsibly build within our cities or within public systems, so on closed systems versus having septic systems. And that's going to require us to also think about some of the other issues, which I think are also climate friendly, about public transportation and how we're going to be able to, if we can build with some density, how we can also cut down on car trips, how we can start to work on that. So those are some of my priorities, is again, looking at how we're doing fire management and having a plan for Montana to be resourceful and reliant on ourselves to be able to do that, but also then to talk about how do we increase and incentivize development within our city cores for more density, so that we really do address what sprawl would look like.
All right, thank you for your answers, everyone. We have one final question on environment, which is, how will you balance conservation interests and interests such as coal and logging? And we did run it a little long on that last question. So just so we have time to answer all the other questions, just try to keep your answers brief. Thank you.
Okay, I think this is a really good question for Montana because we have so many, such a variety of interests in Montana. I believe in balance, advocate, but I do believe in balance. I believe in sustainable logging. I participated in the Whitefish Range Partnership, and that brought together diverse opinions from so many stakeholders. I mean, we had loggers and all kinds of recreation, motorized recreation, non-motorized recreation, landowners, conservation advocates. And we were able, after 13 months of talking and listening to each other, we were able to reach unanimous agreement on a proposal to the Forest Service about how to manage the Whitefish Range. I think that's amazing. I think people can work together across their differences and come up and collaborate and come up with really good solutions. Thank you for the question.
So I agree definitely with what Debo had said in regards to utilization of our resources, again with logging. My background is in forestry resource management. I've been a wildland firefighter for about 6 seasons. I have extensive background in natural resources management, and I've seen it firsthand about what that looks like and what a healthy ecosystem and forest management. There is a balance there. I do believe we need to obviously keep public lands in public hands. I am a firm believer of that. And I also think that, the management of our wildlands should be in the interest of hunters, hikers, fishermen, all the things that we love to do as Montanans. And that is one of the biggest legacy we can leave behind to our future generations, our youth, is the beauty in the land that we have and trying to preserve a lot of that and keep that intact. As far as logging goes, I am for logging in terms of where it is conducive to promote a healthy ecosystem. And unfortunately, due to numerous years of fire suppression, it is important to get that, kind of that mimic, if you will, for certain stands and timber management. And then also, it provides a profit there as well. It provides jobs. It does provide some funding for state units, for the state sections of 16 and 36s for education funding. So there's a lot of good bonuses to that. And as far as coal mining goes, again, I do think that we need to start transitioning away from that part. But for the logging part of it, I do support that. Thank you.
Hi, so Jeremy actually did such a really good job on his answer on the logging side of the question here. I totally agree with him. It comes a lot of it down to forest management, the fact that we've got such a long history, as you said, of fire suppression with regards to our forests, and that we've got to somehow take up the slack of what a natural fire environment would have created as far as a forest ecosystem. And I think that logging should have some sort of role in that, as far as creating a healthy forest ecosystem. I do think that that needs to have a lot of oversight to ensure that companies don't abuse the privileges that we give them to clear cut or do unsustainable logging practices, which unfortunately they do have quite an extensive history of already having done in our state. So what I want to focus a little more on with this question is the coal side. And the question is, how do we balance these things? And I'll be honest, when it comes to coal, there's no balancing to be done here. The fact is simple. Coal's done. The solar is cheaper already than coal. The market has decided this. Solar is cheaper, wind is cheaper, natural gas is cheaper, coal is on its way out. The only people that are buying coal anymore are out-of-state developing countries like China, where they're okay with massive pollution, where I had to wear a mask every day for 5 years to keep out the coal dust, which was causing billions of dollars in healthcare costs to their country. Mr. Skis, I hope that you're aware enough to know that that is not an exaggeration. It's a fact of life when we generate our electricity from these unsustainable practices. What we need to balance with coal is simple. We need to balance how we justly transition our coal workers, our coal workforce to new jobs. How can we guarantee them unemployment benefits so that they're not the ones thrown under the bus when the market inevitably makes its turn toward renewable energies, which is what I plan to help it do.
So I'd like to support that the issue here, again, good things said, has to do with process. That if we're going to talk about balancing things, then that means we talk to everyone involved on the full spectrum of the stakeholders. We take testimony. We do data-driven decision-making. I'm going to really step out on a limb here, and I'm going to tell you that one of our biggest problems in these issues are the issues that these have become politicized rather than driven by data and outcomes. And I'm going to ask Honorable Derek Skis to please provide me after this his sources for the idea that radicals are setting fires in the forests of California. I would love to see that scientific data behind that. I'm also pleased, however, that the Honorable Skis recognizes that there are so many things we can do that we do agree on, and that includes clean air, clean water, and wanting a good environment for our next generation. Thank you.
See, Scout, I told you guys we should do this as a debate. This would be so much funner.
Yes, it would be. Oops, on mute, sorry.
It's sad that I'm the only Republican here. Either I'm courageous or I'm actually embarrassed that my fellow Republicans, for whatever reason, didn't show today. The beautiful thing is this question actually works extremely well bipartisan. Everybody in Montana wants this to happen. So historically, in the last decade that I've been involved, Democrats and Republicans pretty much see eye to eye on this. We have the Montana Environmental Protection Act, and we also have the EPA. Those two things together really work well to allow us to have a really good plan on how we allow things to proceed from this point forward. Clear cutting is no longer allowed. You can have selective logging by age of timber. That's awesome. That's what we need to do. Clear cutting is not a smart thing, and we've decided, obviously, we don't need to do that. We've got the good neighbor federal law now that allows the state by county to start to harvest timber run by the state in the national forest, which is a phenomenal device, which we need to use a lot more. The only thing I want to disagree with, obviously, and Ross, I'd love to set a debate up with you somewhere. That'd be awesome. But coal is not on the way out. And if you look at it, developing countries, China, yeah, sure, they want a ton of coal. I understand that. But if you look at Japan, Japan's reaction to the Fukushima reactor is to switch almost entirely to coal. And Taiwan and South Korea are all following suit. And they've sent numerous trade delegations over here. They want Montana's coal. Out of all 50 states, Montana has one of the highest coal concentrations. It's the biggest thing in the ground that can make us money. We have the highest SO2 free low burning, it doesn't have the metallics, but a lot of people that want clean burning coal want Montana coal. We can't get it to the market because Portland and Seattle have blocked us in direct violation of the Commerce Clause and the U.S. Constitution, which of course we're suing them. And I think that'll see some fruition. If not, we'll go up through British Columbia and come out through Vancouver. I'm sure that's going to come up here soon. And the evidence that the cost of coal, that it is higher than the renewables, there's so many variables you need to take into effect. They always talk about the coal that was going directly out of the mine, going right into coal strip 1. That seam was going deeper and deeper and deeper into the earth. That coal was getting more expensive. That's the only scientific study they track in Montana, where they talk about how coal is getting so much more expensive. When you look at wind and solar, you have to look at the subsidies they get federally and in the state just to build build, the subsidies they get on transmission, and the subsidies they get on generation. It is not cheaper. And so that has been debunked by some really good research in Montana. So coal has a future. The only reason coal doesn't, quote unquote, have the future is because a certain political party in America wants to destroy it. Coal has a future in Montana. And as long as I'm an elected representative, I'm going to fight for it. Thank you.
All right. Well, one, I really just have to say again, I appreciate that, Derek, you do are joining in this conversation. I do think that sometimes we need to find bipartisan ways to at least have the forums and have these conversations. Two, I also agree with you. We have a lot of things that are built into, especially into the Montana Constitution, which gives us a lot of conservation strength in Montana. We have a relatively young constitution, and I think that that's great that we have those standards there. One of the things I think that sometimes that we need, and we don't look enough and have enough conversations, and one of them is particularly about timber. And if we look at Columbia Falls, there's a company called Smartland, which is talking about how we can produce high density wood products that are able to be the new building materials for the future, which would help us replace concrete and rebar buildings, which just concrete alone is a pretty pollutant product to build. And so I think that Montana, we don't talk enough about how we can connect to a new economy and to some of the new materials, especially in the timber industry, something that is more sustainable and more the future of where it is. And we need to be able to make sure that businesses are getting to do that. We're also seeing the same thing outside of Billings. There's Cargill Agriculture, which is working to be able to look at how we can do more sustainable food models when it comes down to fisheries and stuff like that, but also again, how to connect Montana economy to some of the new products out there. And again, we see solar and wind companies out in the Billings area that are flourishing. So I do think that there's part of it is how to connect our business and our manufacturing to that. And again, I think that one of those, that's where I would push back a little bit on some conservation interests. I agree with Representative Skis that we aren't seeing the clear cutting. We aren't seeing those type of things, and things like timber. Actually, there's a lot of future of how we could move that into future conversations.
All right, thank you, everyone. I know we don't have many outside viewers here, but if any of you have questions on that segment, now would be the time. If not, hang on, If not, we are just going to move on to our next section, which is COVID-19. So the first question is, how will your campaign address the Flathead Valley as a current national hotspot for COVID-19, as well as other hotspots in Montana?
Okay, well, this pandemic has really affected our communities, our way of life, our economy. We need to follow the science. That's number one. We need to follow the science. You know, everybody is tired of this pandemic, and we've gotten pretty lax in how we behave, but I think it's a matter of personal responsibility. We need to take responsibility. We need to wear a mask. We need to social distance. We need to keep our gatherings very small. This isn't about personal freedom. This is about taking responsibility. All of us want to have our businesses open and our schools open. And in order to do that, we all have to take responsibility. So I don't think this should be a partisan issue. This should be an issue about how do we keep our schools and businesses open? How do we protect each other? How do we stay safe? Thank you.
Okay, I live and breathe this just about every day. I know most everybody else across this world has been affected in some way, shape, form, or another. And I realize it's indeed especially hit high schools, local high schools pretty hard at this time. And I know you guys experienced firsthand is what that feels like. I think, you know, we really do need to grasp and get a handle, figure out solutions, long-term plans to be put in place for that awaiting vaccination, if you will. We need to have the resources and plans set in place for that to roll out. The sooner that we're able to get the pandemic here, and looking at other places, what they're doing successfully, we can learn a lot from people and places, New Zealand, South Korea, all these other different countries who have been able to manage to get a handle on it early on and get away relatively unscathed, I suppose, as far as very few cases or no current cases at all, which is pretty impressive considering, what we're experiencing right here in the Flathead. I think I agree with Debo. It's definitely up to each person to really take that responsibility in hand. But I also think that, we have to have the allocation come in to assist local governments and health departments to tackle this and have the means and resources in order to do so. As well as, all the severe mitigation that can be done when people are out of work, if schools do shut down, all of that good stuff in terms of a plan in place, how we're going to mitigate, how we're going to make that relief for every individual who's going to be suffering, whether or not being able to make rent or mortgage payment due to being out of the job for 2 weeks or even longer, sometimes months. And especially if there's remote learning, encouraging employers to do that for, remote work. I guess I'm getting into the next question there, Eva. I apologize already, but it is all tied together. It truly is. And I think, the sooner that we can really get a handle on it and the quicker we can come up with long-term plans on moving forward is where the change is going to happen.
All right, well, it's my turn to go ahead and be the one to rock the boat this time. And I'm going to have to say that I respectfully disagree with at least one thing that my previous Democrat candidates have said, which is the point that this is a individual responsibility and that it shouldn't be politicized. I'm sorry, but we need to face the facts here. There is one group in this country, and in fact, if you want to be very specific, there's one person in this country who has made this a political issue, all right? Before Donald Trump, this was a medical issue about facts of science and facts of epidemiology and how to properly prepare for pandemics, which we've done numerous times throughout our country's history by following what science says. There was one group of people that decided to turn it into a political football. And at this point, I can take as much personal responsibility as I want, but when the cult following of our current leader refuses to listen and refuses to take responsibility because of that politicization, then it is not an effective countermeasure to this pandemic. Now, as a candidate for a state legislative position, I'm going to take a more statewide view on what I would do in response to it. But essentially, I will listen to scientists, I will listen to doctors, and I'll be honest, if the doctors are saying, in order to defeat this virus with no vaccine, we need a second shutdown, I would go ahead and recommend a second shutdown. But only if that was paired with fully funding community relief packages, pauses on rent payments, making sure everyone has full unemployment benefit so that if you get laid off through no fault of your own because of the pandemic, you have still got access to 100% of your previous salary, plus fully funding our state medical our state medical programs, and making sure that our essential workers are essential and not expendable. We need to make sure that they've got the pay so that they can continue to pay their bills while they're still working for us on the job, and the equipment to protect them while they're at work. So that's my take on that question. Thank you.
So I want to focus again on something totally different. I want to talk about how the COVID-19 has exposed some concepts in our culture that we're very unclear about. And we have a close role model for a good response to the COVID-19 hotspots. in our indigenous population and our sovereign nations who have a culture that supports the safety of their elders as the carriers of their culture, and that supports the needs of the community in taking the risk, that sudden risk they took so early on to close everything down to try to keep things safe. And so I want us to remember that some of us grew up with Star Trek and with Spock, and the real answer is that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. And so we have a tension between the needs of the community and the needs for rugged individualism and freedom. And it's a tough one. I don't say there's a right answer to it, but I'm saying unless we talk openly about the balance between individual rights and the balance of the needs of the community, we will be flailing in the dark.
Excellent, thanks. Before we begin, I didn't answer the question earlier from Miss Allen. I said Oregon, you can play the tape. I said there was arson in Oregon fires, and all you gotta do is Google the phrase arson fires in Portland, Oregon. There's over 100 different arson fires right now that the state of Oregon is asking for help and trying to solve. So just do a search, you'll be able to get the information. If you can't, then New York Times did a story, LA Times did a story. I've got.
I know how to Google. Thank you for giving me your source. Excellent.
All right, I'm going to shock everybody else too and state the exact tenor of this question. This question is, what will I do to help? How will my campaign address the Flathead Valley? This is in the purview of our local health officer by law, by code, and the Board of Health, and they're solving the situation by the laws that we gave them. The only thing I can do is, as a legislator, when the session begins, and perhaps looking at different ways and that we could adjust and or look at how the crisis has been solved and deal with laws relating to that concept. And so I can't do anything locally. It's not my purview as a representative. And so I'm not going to take the bait of Ross, although I really, really want to, but that's my answer for that question.
Thank you for the question. And this one, I agree with Representative Skies. I mean, this is really sort of built into state code and state statute. As far as one of my larger concerns is I probably will be having a little bit more dialogue with Representative Skies about how many changes we should have and what's working and what's not working. I don't want to see us strip away authority from our health officer. I mean, I think that part of it, having a centralized decision-making process is really helpful in a pandemic like this. So I think we want to be able to move forward with that. But as a Flathead representative, I think one thing that's a really big priority is to bring the importance of being able to open up both sides of Glacier Park. Right now, we operated with Glacier Park only being halfway open. And part of that is that how do we support our neighbors in Glacier County and the Blackfeet Nation to make sure that they are getting the health resources to be able to get on top of COVID adequately there so that we can open up the east side of the park, and that we are supporting to make sure that we're having a good management tool of how we be able to work with tourists in the community. Again, because what I see as a side effect of COVID this year was that we only opened half of the park, and we ended up pushing a lot of people out of the park and back into the Flathead County and onto some of our public lands and onto places like Blankenship Beach, which we did not want to do. So again, it is more of an economic solution of that we need to be able to work together as counties to make sure that we're equally being able to address the COVID issue from one center to the other. And again, the differences between making sure that that's also in a rural or in a place where the Blackfeet Nation is versus a density population like the Flathead, making sure that we're able to do both sides.
Right, and we have one final question on COVID. Once again, we are still running a little bit over, so try to keep answers as brief as you can. I know that's hard. How would you address unemployment in Montana, especially for those affected by coronavirus?
Okay, because of this pandemic, we have a lot of people suffering and worrying about paying their bills and staying in their homes. And we need to do everything that we can to make sure that people who have lost their jobs because of this pandemic have unemployment benefits. With that said, our state cannot run on a deficit. And this is very expensive. So we are going to need to join with the federal government to get the unemployment resources that we need during this pandemic. This is an emergency situation, and I think what we should be doing is pressuring our leaders in Washington, D.C. to pass the next relief bill instead of playing politics with people's lives. Thank you.
That is a very good and tough question. There's a lot of complexities involved in this. I do see kind of the root of this is back on employers, allowing and listening to science and the fact that I know certain employers have a policy in place where an employee may not return to work until they have a negative test after they've tested positive. And the thing behind that is the dead cells of the virus will shed for quite some time, and that's almost impossible. They may be out of work for a month or plus, and by that time they're filing for unemployment because they can't afford to make a living. I think overall, encouraging employers and maybe giving some additional support for employers, especially on a local level, to enable them to either provide some COVID pay for people who are on quarantine or in isolation, to help mitigate some of that unemployment, the number of cases of unemployment that are rising every day. And only I get the how affordable is that? Well, I think if we could provide some tax incentives for some of those businesses in conjunction with some relief money to help a lot of these local businesses to be able to pay COVID pay for employees. I know a lot of corporations are able to do that because they can afford to do that. But a lot of local businesses are unable to do that. And then they face the staffing shortages and then possible shutdowns due to even staffing shortages. Once, a whole one case, then it multiplies 2-3 cases and everybody's in quarantine, just like the schools that's happening in classrooms. And, I think overall it's a very tough and complicated solutions to really tackle this down. And I agree, the state cannot run on a deficit. But, I think together we're able to really, both sides of the aisle needs to really work together and come up with solutions of how we can address the unemployment rates within the Flathead, and how do we address all of the other bits and pieces of just making it easier for families to afford housing. I mean, not worry about having to be homeless, not worry about, so many things, food on the table. It's all tied together again. But I think it's a very complicated question, but it is a great question to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And again, I'm finding that Jeremy's really doing a great summation, I think, of a lot of the things, and also Debo, that we need to look into with regards to helping out in the unemployment due to COVID. I guess that what I would boil it down to is simple. We shouldn't be forcing people's livelihoods and lives to be on the line because of whether or not they're employed during a pandemic crisis. So we need another stimulus relief package. This is what we need. We need to be able to pay our workers when they are out of the workforce, whether because they have caught COVID or just because that's been decreed that their company is going to shut down for the time being until the vaccine shows up. We need to be able to give them a stimulus package, just like CARES. I like Bernie Sanders' proposal of $2,000 a month. The idea isn't so that people can make more while at home than they did going to work. The idea is people can't go to work because they're spreading a deadly virus and it's killing our friends and neighbors. And yet we can't have them just, starving and being kicked out of their apartments because they're not at work as well. The big sticker for this thing is the funding. We're going to need to pursue alternative revenue streams. I think one thing that we could look into is diverting some of the earnings if we do legalize marijuana in our state. Currently, we've already got some things on the ballot about how that money should be spent, but we could look at diverting some of that revenue toward COVID unemployment relief as an example, and many other things to be looked at as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to be what Eva is requesting, which is brief. Everyone else has spoken in many areas, and I'm going to say probably the key thing that we can do to support our workers and our families through this crisis is to ensure that we maintain Medicaid expansion, since so many of our persons will lose their insurance coverage when they lose their jobs. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. Brevity is the soul of wit. Excellent job, Ms. Allen. This solution is already before us. Our partners in the federal branch of government's given the state of Montana $1.25 billion that was put into the general fund for the governor to immediately disperse to solve the problems of COVID. The legislature has determined that maybe 40% of that money's been actually allocated, but less than 10% of it's actually been paid. Why this governor is sitting on that huge pile of money when he could be doing a lot more things to help folks that are struggling with this COVID problem, it is beyond me. So the money's there. We don't need another stimulus program. We need to allocate the money that we already have. I pray that Trump and the federal government will continue to allow that to be dispersed after January 1. And that way in the session, we can work to try and solve ways to help Montanans that are truly struggling in this pandemic.
And thank you again for the question. One of my largest concerns about the solutions that we look at, whether with a lot of the funding is yes going to come from stimulus money, it's in how we can direct that money, but also how to make sure that we're looking at long-term solutions. So we're not looking for how we're building career paths into public health or into being first responders, so that we're not just looking at temporary job fixes, but looking at how we can take some of that money to make sure that we're taking it to leverage people into a long-term solution, especially if there's shifts and changes in the economy, so that they would have long-term jobs. So that my answer to that.
All right, so we have about half an hour left of our planned time and we still have a lot of questions. So I'm going to leave this up to the candidates. We can either extend the forum time by around half an hour and try to get through more questions, or we can cut some questions and just try to get one question on each topic. So feel free to put what you would prefer in the chat as we answer this next question, which is under the segment Safety and Law Enforcement. Given the views surrounding the current policing system in Montana and policing nationally, what police reforms, if any, do you believe are most important to implement?
Okay. It's a big question. I'm glad you've asked it. I think that we expect way too much out of our dedicated police officers. We ask them to not only deal with crimes, but we ask them to deal with domestic disputes and mental health issues and all kinds of other things that they don't have any training for. And it seems like we need more community resources to handle some of these problems that police officers have to handle. I was a public school teacher and a principal, and I got to see how community policing works. The resource officers in our schools were able to develop relationships with young people, and they could solve problems before they became big problems. They could de-escalate situations before they became real problems. And yes, we have some problems in this country. I would say that the vast majority of our police officers are well-meaning, good citizens who have gone into public service to do the good things that they do. And as with any group, there are a few bad apples who are not doing what they should do sometimes. And we need to figure out processes to deal with those people. And we also, as a society, need to deal with the larger problem of systemic racism, which does exist. People are treated differently. Still, in this country, after all these years, people are often treated differently by the way they look or the color of their skin. And this is work that we all need to do as in our society to change this. Thank you.
Okay. As a former law enforcement officer, you have to break it down. You know, there's city, county, state, and federal law enforcement agencies out there. Each one is, you know, they have guidelines and policies that govern each department, and especially at the very local level with the CDPD, the local community are the ones to really be deciding what the policy is and how officers should go about their normal duties. Now, with that said, you know, there are several different law enforcement academies out there, and they do teach different things, and every state's going to be different. Again, it goes back to the respective communities, and that's what community policing is definitely about, is part of that. And I believe that, you know, the policies in place do need to be reviewed as frequently as possible, whether that be with the CDPD, whether that be with the state, all the way up to the federal levels. And that's, you know, that in itself is where the change will happen, in order to screen out and hiring people that are bad apples. Like Deborah was saying, they're in every profession, you've got them. And I think that overall, the policies do need to be changed, and the use of force continuum, you know, there could definitely be some adjustments there in that regards. But outside of that, again, it all goes down to who is developing those policies and which agency, because it's vastly different. A law enforcement CDPD is very different from a federal law enforcement officer, kind of apples and oranges there. With the same, you know, the same thought of protect and serve, that is pretty underlying for all law enforcement. Thank you.
All right. So I guess with Debo and Jeremy's really well enunciated answers as far as actual changes that I would support as with our own state and our local PDs. You know, I think they've really hit the nail on the head already. So I want to just mention, with what time I do have, what the core of the question is about, which is what's the current feelings behind law enforcement these days. So I want to enunciate what that is real quick. So like, let's say exactly what those feelings are and why they're happening. And it's a fact, there's a problem when police in our country are harassing and murdering our fellow unarmed citizens in the streets with no legal recourse for their families and with no consequences for those bad actors in the police departments. That's what we're talking about here. So let's, you know, keep that in mind when we think about the problem that we need to tackle. It's not just that some people have some feelings about the police. There are real, honest problems that are happening across our country. Thankfully, less so in our state right now, but we want to keep it that way, right? And as Debo rightly pointed out, all of these are just a symptom of the main problem of systemic racism in our country, that is institutionalized racism that allows, you know, minorities and people of color and lesbian, gay community members to basically be harassed without legal recourse and treated differently than the rest of us. So let's just keep that in mind. And otherwise, I completely agree with Debo and Jeremy's thoughts. We need more investment in community resources, mental health resources, so that the police can get back to doing their real jobs of policing, rather than being brought into situations where you know, a community worker might be a more appropriate responder to that situation. Thank you.
So I, again, like to focus a little differently. I want to remind the group that my career was, in fact, as one of the types of persons that we've talked about using to enhance social services that can minimize the impact on police work. So I was a first responder in mental health crises in a large urban area. And our job, in fact, was to respond to 19-year-old schizophrenics developing psychotic breaks. I assessed potential school shooters. I responded to persons who had attempted to kill themselves or tried to break into their father's gun closet in order to shoot themselves. So most of my work has been in coordination and cooperation with various law enforcements, including local Flathead law enforcement. And the issue is complicated and complex. And our law enforcement has received tons of unfunded mandates. I was working with Flathead Sheriff's Department when they were no longer allowed to just dump a drunk person by the side of the road, but there were no 24-hour places in Flathead County, and we have no detox, and we have no drunk tank. And so one of our first things is we must support the kind of social networks that let police not get bogged down in these social aspects. And then secondly, and I have decades of experience in working with law enforcement, as an enforcement person, we need to recognize that when you are in a position of enforcing rules on someone else, you are at constant risk of slipping down into a culture of predator and prey. And that you very quickly can, without good training and good support, lose your vision about the fact that you are there to serve and protect. And I watched it happen to human service people, and I watched it happen to law enforcement. And there's tons of training that can be done. I myself worked under qualified immunity, and we had open discussions about ways in which you maintained your good ethical practice. So do we need to do this? We absolutely do. Even in the Old West, you weren't allowed to shoot somebody in the back.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to answer the question that's actually asked of us. Montana doesn't need any legal reforms. I serve on the Judiciary Committee. In the last 3 bienniums, we've never had anything like this come before the committee from either state or county governments in Montana asking us to solve these types of problems. We're fortunate in Montana, we don't have these problems. I'm not a federal legislator, so therefore I won't speak on the big national issues. And so that's the answer to the question. We don't need any reforms in Montana.
And this one is actually, I do think that there's some differences again between national issues and some of our local issues. But the truth is that because I'm on city council in Kalispell, we do crisis intervention. We have a grant to be able to look at that, and I think that we need to be able to again support some of that local work that we're doing. We have some things like having a drug treatment court, and that's been legalized in Montana, and I think that those are programs which are really good, and we need to be able to support and expand them, because that is actually lets us have more of the community interventions. So I do agree that some of those things are available right now underneath the current systems, and we need to be able to support them and be able to advance them and be able to do that. I'm again thankful that we do have some of that training and some of those that work already available and being done, and making sure that it's being funded not through just grants, but having some permanent funding is important, but also having some expansion to be able to do that drug treatment work as well is really important to be able to do.
All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to move on to education. What do you think is the current most pressing education issue, and what will you do to address it? Once again, brevity is appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, our great Montana Constitution establishes the right for every student to a quality public education. I think that's a really important part of our Constitution. It has 2 components. One is adequate funding, and the other one is, well, what do we mean by quality? What do we mean by quality education? So we need adequate funding, and we also need a recognition that one size does not fit all. So I think that, so your question is, what would we do to address it? I think that it's really important, even though we're going to be in a budget crunch, that we as legislators make sure that we are funding quality education in our schools, in our communities. And Columbia Falls, which is a community I represent, has been a leader in making sure that small rural and small community schools get their fair share of that funding. And as a legislator from Columbia Falls, I will continue that, making sure that we get adequate funding for public education, quality public education. Thanks.
I'm going to pretty much echo what Deba said. I believe that additional funding is required for education, and it is necessary to pay our teachers, our high school counselors, all the faculty at a definitely a wage in which they're what the kinds of work they do, that they're worth it. And as far as higher education, I think we do need to look at that and need to try and focus a little bit more on college tuition, right? You know, we want to produce some of the best and brightest upcoming folks in the nation. In order to do that, they have to be able to afford to go to college and get that education and make that happen. And so I think we really do need to look at that.
Okay, I'll try to speed through this. First, for background, this is simple. It's the cost of our education is out of hand. Students can't afford to get a college degree that these days has the same value as a GED had 40 years ago. The costs of books has skyrocketed. I had to pay $499 for a single textbook once in one of my classes when I was in school. The costs have only gone up since then. Student housing is through the roof. And of course, tuition is through the roof. We need to put a limit on student loan interest rates. Right now, student loans are charged an interest that's high enough that our own government is profiting off of that interest rate. So are our banks. They're profiting off of the interest rates of student loans. We don't do that with most other loans in this country. We need student debt forgiveness. Student loans are the only kinds of loans in this country where the debt holder cannot declare bankruptcy for any reason. You're stuck with that debt permanently until you have it paid off or until you die, whichever comes first. And we need to expand financial aid across our state. Montana ranks 49th in the country for in-state tuition assistance. That's shameful. It's pathetic. We're cutting short the futures of our smartest and brightest students by not giving them a source of a quality education in this state. But let me just answer right now, the biggest struggle is COVID. So we need to increase funding to all of our local schools, all the way down from college down to the preschools, so that we can give our teachers and students the resources to conduct either hybrid or remote learning, which unfortunately we don't have that infrastructure in place right now. We need to massively expand the funding and the support for those programs so that in the midst of this virus, we can continue to have good quality education for all Montanans.
Concur on that one. The biggest crisis right now is the COVID, which is totally impacting classes and also all the other social things that matter so much when we are in the education process. Perfect time, I think, for us to innovate and work on our infrastructure for internet. It's clear this isn't going away overnight. We may as well use it as a chance to focus on that process. Thank you.
Excellent. The biggest problem with education system in Montana today is accountability to the way the money is spent. In Montana, we spend over $12,000 per student. So if you look at a classroom of 30 people, that's $3,600,000. And the starting wage for teachers coming into that classroom are $36,000. That is a huge discrepancy. The biggest problem in Montana on that accountability is that Montana is too top heavy. Here in the Flathead County, we have 18 school districts for Flathead County, 18 boards, 18 superintendents. It's way too top heavy. We have over 400 different school districts in Montana. It averages 1.9 schools per school district. There are other states that in Long Island, there's 1,000 schools in one school district. So I want money in the hands of the teachers. I want money in the classroom teaching our children. I want a higher wage when teachers start. And the way we're going to get that is to start consolidating these districts. There should be one school district in Flathead County. We're a tight little county. We have all these cities are right around each other. We should have one school district that handles the administration of buses and textbooks and that kind of thing, and run all these other schools by principals. Allow parents to have input on the principal's decisions, just like they do with these with the different school boards. So that's the problem is and you look at Montana, we're in the top. I got to look at my numbers again, but we're very high on the cost per student. And look at what we're getting. we're ranked in the 30th for math, English. I mean, we're not getting bang for our buck. So what we need is accountability on the money that we spend. We don't need additional money to be spent.
Great. And so one of my concerns and some of my thoughts are on this one is, one, quality education and educating our youth in public education is how we actually produce a good workforce from Montana. If we want people to have good paying jobs, we also need to make sure that they are able to be hired for those quality jobs. But I'm going to sort of jump to the second side of this question, which is one of the other things which we need to, I think, address is a high youth suicide rate that we have in Montana, which does disproportionately affect our LGBT community and youth. And there are things that I think that we need to also look at how we support those mental health interventions, again, in the school setting. Columbia Falls has some really good models of that. I think that some of it is looking at programs like that and making sure that those are available across the state. And then there's also some things like free preschool and being able to get pre-education into before going into school, but also looking at curriculums within our elementary schools that reduce suicidality, but it actually also those type of programs which help kids work with their social emotional issues also help them study more and become, again, a better student and be able to get done. So I think that addressing some of the concerns that I have about a high youth suicide rate would also help us make school better for kids and make our workforce stronger going forward.
All right, thank you, everyone. We did have a question from an audience member about preschool. I know some of you already answered that. If you want to take a look at that in the chat, go for it. And we are going to move on to political rights, particularly what will your campaign and you in office do to address Native American voter rights?
I think that voter suppression has been a big problem nationwide. In terms of Montana, I think that we need to be really sure that every citizen in Montana has the right to vote and a way to vote well. There aren't any reservations in my district, but I'm still concerned to make sure that Native people in Montana have their voices heard in our democratic process. I know in some states there have been active suppression of voting rights on reservations, and I would be totally opposed to that and would work against that. I think we need to, I think, you know, we have some of the best voting rights and campaign laws anywhere in the country in this state. And I am strongly supportive of all of that. Thank you.
I mean, every citizen in Montana has that right to vote if they want to vote. And I believe that in order for, you know, I don't have reservations again in my district either, but I do know it is definitely there's some cultural differences between our difference that Jennifer pointed out a little bit earlier in response to the COVID-19 and how they're handling things. But I think as long as there's, you know, encourage more Native individuals to get involved in politics, to run for office, I think that will also help with increasing that voter turnout and just making it more accessible across reservations statewide is key.
As a candidate for the Montana State Legislature, I'm definitely going to be taking a statewide perspective when it comes to our Native, the rights of our Native Americans and our Native people here. What I plan to do is work with those current representatives we already have from the tribal communities, such as Ray Peppers, Sharon Paraguay. Hopefully Donovan Hawk can get in there, Shane Morjo, because these are voices in our Democratic Party that are already actively fighting to give tribal members access to the ballot box, even out on the reservation lands where some people do not have physical addresses from which to vote from. And I would plan to continue to find ways to ensure the voting rights. And I look forward to working closely to bring more Native voices into our government, for working groups, for councils, so that we can, more actively collaborate. I also think that, we should be looking at building out infrastructure so that they've got access to rural broadband and usable roads, so that they've got easier access to voting and every other, important service that we should be providing.
So I would concur with Ross here. We have 7% of our legislators currently are from the sovereign tribes, which about matches our population, our Native American population, but that still leaves them as a minority in the legislature, which means they need allies and they need persons to listen to what it is that they are telling us is the issues they need resolved around voter rights.
I'm going to say that I have many friends in the tribal caucus, and there are so many federal protections and state-based Montana Constitution protections for the tribe. They do have some issues, like Mr. Frazier had said, about addresses and ballot access, and those are concerns I don't think we need new laws for. We just need to help accentuate that and make sure that those problems are addressed. I think the number one thing that's wrong with our political system, at least in the election department, is it's been decades since we've gone through the voter rolls. Now we have an all mail-in ballot, and they're sending out by shotgun anybody who's ever historically voted. It shows that I often say as a joke in one of my political speeches that when I die, I want to be buried in Butte. That way I can be in politics forever. We need to work at our voter rolls. We got to make sure that the folks that are actually voting are the folks that are entitled to a vote in Montana, because if we don't, then it dilutes down and makes your vote not count. The biggest problem I have at the doors, and when I'm talking to folks trying to get involved, especially young folks like you two ladies, is that people think that their vote doesn't count. We need to make sure that everybody understands that your vote is sacred. It needs to be counted. It must be counted. And if you look at our Montana Constitution, when we swear an oath that very first day on the House floor, we're swearing an oath to uphold the purity of the elective process. In other words, we need to guarantee that, one, machines can't be remotely accessed. We need to guarantee that if we do this mail, that we have a chain of custody from when that ballot goes into that box, from when that box is counted. There are a lot of things in Montana election law that we need to look at to guarantee that people's votes are not cheated and that the system is not gamed for either party. And so I'm a huge advocate of that. And I think this question, all three of these questions are actually pretty important in this. And that's the way I view on this one. It's I look forward to working, is one of the last questions is, how will I work across the aisle? I'm lucky. I have many friends that are Democrats. I know that I'm a flamethrower and people say I'm the unapologetic conservative, but I actually listen. I like to be proven wrong. I have a lot of opinions. I've read a lot of things. I've been in this thing for probably too long. But man, if I'm wrong, prove me wrong. And I love to talk and listen to Democrats because their perspective matters. And the simple reason is because when you guys get there, you represent either 10,000 people or 20,000 people in Montana, the sovereign citizens of this good state. And so I look forward to any one of you folks that make it to the dance. I look forward to working with you and helping to get good legislation passed for the state of Montana.
Just to address the question, actually, Native American voter rights in Montana is a good example of where we have a systemic problem. And the systemic problem is that all 7 of our nations are divided between 2 or 3 different counties, which means that, especially when it comes down to elections, that all 7 of our nations have multiple elections offices that they report to, and there are inconsistencies, and it has been proven out that within that has becomes inconsistencies within our reservations. That needs to be resolved. That is systemic thing that we should be resolving. I mean, I don't know that it is fair for anybody who's in one community to have to go to two different courthouses, which are outside of their office. Again, as we're looking at some of the improvements with mail-in ballots, those are some things that help level that off, but we have to look at what the PO box system looks like on the reservations. But again, I think that each of those nations deserves to have equal way across and a uniform way across their reservation to be able to get into elections, because right now some of them are piecemealed in different settings. So that's just something where I do think there is some legislation and some reform that needs to be done, which is again fixing some systemic problems that are just built into the system of having two different courthouses that you have to go report to. And those are things that we can address, and there's some legislation that's already being there to do that. And I think that that's part of how we just make sure that everybody has an equal access, so that everybody can vote easily, and that it's something that is able to do. So.
All right, thank you, everyone. And I know we're cutting it a little close on time, but we had one question from the audience that should be a short answer. And that was, who is one figure from an opposing political party that you respect and look up to, and why? So that will be our closing question for this forum.
From an opposing political party, I would say the first name that came to my mind was Bob Brown in the Republican Party. He was a Secretary of State in Montana, and he ran for governor and barely lost. The thing I really respect about Bob is that he believes in listening and working with other people who he doesn't agree with. He believes in people working across the aisle. And I think that's really important. We have gotten too divided in our politics. It's too polarized. And we need to figure out ways to come together, work together from our different perspectives, move things forward to make this state and our communities better than they've ever been. Thank you.
That's a great question. I think, overall, I'm going to go outside of, Bob Brown. I definitely respect in more ways than one. Debo, I've met him a few different times, and I've spoken with him. I do definitely admire everything that he has and done, and how he is willing to definitely work across the aisle and reach across that aisle. But also, I'm going to kind of go a little bit bigger. The first person that popped into my mind was, it's probably sound funny, but Mitt Romney, to be honest with you. And the fact that, the guy, he definitely votes what is conscious to him, what is important, and not so much along party lines. And I do respect that out of any individual who's able to stand up, even, in the toughest of times, and still be able to stand by what they firmly believe and the reasons why and how they need to back that up. And if the people they're representing is saying that, that's what they need to follow through with.
All right. The first person that comes to my mind, and the first, major national level Republican that that has earned my respect, I would go with John McCain, old school, original John McCain before his presidential run, because of his penchant for going around the Senate and handing out the latest copies of National Geographic magazines to other members of the Senate. He just completely, earned my respect and my love. A fellow, someone who actually cares about what's going on in the world around them, takes such a broad perspective and really wants to understand the science behind things and share that with others in our government. And I think that is so important. So he totally has my respect there. He did, at least. And it was too bad to see him go.
I'm going to say that the person in the opposing party that I respected was Bush Sr. And right there, that shows my age. I'm sorry. And not necessarily because of policies or procedures. I disagreed with most everything that he stood for and what he did, but I will never forget his inaugural speech where he talked about the need for each of us as a member of our community and our nation to be one of hundreds and thousands of points of light to the others around us and to serve others.
Thank you to the, I couldn't see who actually thought of that question, but that's a great question. And I truly hope that all the Democrats on this panel, that once you guys start serving, you'll be able to narrow that focus down to a Republican in the legislature. And I must say that Bob Brown self-identifies now as a Democrat. So I don't know that that's actually a good choice, but my guy that I really respect and honor is Jonathan Windyboy. He's on House District 32. And Jonathan always votes exactly how he perceives it's going to be the most important for his citizens. And a lot of you folks don't understand this because you're not there yet. You don't understand. And Debo, you could talk to your predecessor about this because Zach and I are good buddies. I've known Zach forever. And the very first thing I told Zach was, man, when you serve, watch out. The Democrats are so strong in their caucus that it's difficult for you guys to vote outside of what they want you to vote. And the pressure's immense. And so Jonathan doesn't faze him at all. Jonathan's going to vote the way he wants to vote. You can't lobby him. You can't change his opinion. He's going to do what's best for his district every single time. And if you look at it consistently across the votes on the House floor, when anybody breaks away from the Democrat block vote mentality, it's Jonathan Windyboy. And I respect him for that. I think it's awesome. Again, Jonathan is a Democrat. And he's a progressive, and there's a lot of things that Jonathan agrees, or I should say, believes in that I don't identify with, and I'm usually on the opposite side of. But I respect the fact that he maintains an independent mind. He focuses on the folks of his district, and he always votes that way. So for me, in Montana, it'd be Jonathan Windyboy.
Great. And yes, I think it is a good question. I think we do have some good examples. I mean, I think part of it is that, if any of us get the honor to work, we're going to have to work with the diversity of our own delegation here from the Flathead and work together. The person who came to my mind was Judy Martz. I was part of a program called Leadership Montana, and Judy Martz, back around the in the early 2000s, I mean, really worked with Max Baucus to start to look at what was a political divide that they were seeing over 20 years ago to establish Leadership Montana and to start to talk about how people should be able to work together without being disagreeable. And I do think that even as partisan as Judy was, it was pretty awesome that she was able to see beyond that and see for the betterment of Montana and to put some real good investment into the community to look at how to get both sides to work together.
All right, and that was our final question. I just wanted to thank you all so much once again for dedicating so much of your Saturday afternoon to talk with us. One thing we do have Isaac Marion here, who's the Executive Director of Montana Youth Action, if any of you had questions about the organization. And once again, thank you all so much for coming. If you want the recording of this forum for any reason, just shoot me an email and I will send it over. That's it.